Good afternoon, good morning, good
Good
evening, wherever
afternoon,
you are in the
everyone.
world. I'd like to welcome you all to African History Month's sixth conference this month. And in this month, we'll be talking about and focusing on the African Holocaust, Maafa, Remembrance of the Victims of the Transatlantic, the Indian Ocean, and Trans-Saharan slave trade, Arabs, and the European role in slavery. Today, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today and also for our sponsors, Tunacheki TV, Council of Ethiopian Diaspora Action, and all our many other sponsors who have made this event possible. I'd also like to thank our president, our president, Daniel Wambonu, president of United States of Africa, who's made this all possible. And without further ado, I'd like to turn events over to Martin, who will perform the libation for these events.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Martin.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much. Now I'm going to do the libation pouring. And for those of you who don't know what I am about to do, now this is called the libation pouring. That is praying to our ancestors through pouring of a drink, alcoholic beverage. Now this afternoon, I am going to do that, and I hope you all listen, and then we learn from it. I'll be using English and sometimes mixed with a little bit of Twi, Ghanaian language. Chodian Pokwame, Toto Bonsu, Omeria, the giver of sunshine, receive drink. Nana Sasia, the earth goddess, receive drink. Ye departed souls of our ancestors, come for your drink. The great Marcus Garvey, the great leaders of our people who took us across the Atlantic, receive drink. You who have always been behind us, who have guided us, we are calling you. Whenever we are called to share three things with any other people, let us have two. Grant us peace, grant us prosperity, grant us wisdom, and above all, grant us unity. Let no evil come upon us. To whom wishes evil, let evil fall upon themselves. Twa Omeniaba Yao. Thank you very much. This brings my libation to a close. Thank you. Over to you, Diana.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Martin. We will now have Dr. Kevin Washington, Mwata Carey, PhD. Kevin Washington is an African-centered psychologist licensed in Florida and Washington, D.C. He has taught, lectured at several colleges and universities, nationally and internationally. NBC Universal, Ben, National Alliance, and End Homelessness. Roland Martin, Nick Cannon, Boris L. Henson Foundation, Essence, and many other national and international organizations have sought his expertise on Black psychological matters and leadership development. He is a past president of the Association of Black Psychologists and is currently an associate professor and head of the sociology and psychology at Grambling State University. Is the National Director of Black Marriage Day. Kevin Washington received a bachelor's degree in psychology from Grambling State University and a master's degree in educational psychology, as well as a doctoral degree in counseling psychology from Texas A&M University. As a Fulbright Hays Scholar, Kevin Wata researched the impact of socializing institutions on the healing of restructuring of post-apartheid South Africa, Azania. He worked with scholars from the University of Cape Town, University of Fort Hare, University of Durban, Westville, and University of Zululand, KwaZulu, Natal, and others. He has conducted leadership training for students, faculty, and administrators, and continues developing leadership models that is grounded within a cultural competent framework. His expertise in multicultural African-centered service delivery. Dr. Washington, I now hand over to you.
Thank you, and let me unmute. It is a pleasure and an honor to be in this particular observance, this presentation, to discuss, to share with family the dynamics of the Maafa, the Holocaust. And one of the things that we have to recognize is that we cannot use the oppressor's language to discuss, to describe our phenomena. For that reason, scholars such as Dr. Marimba Ani, Dr. Asa Hilliard, and others advanced the concept of the Maafa, the great suffering of African people at the hands of Europeans and Arabs. And so we must recognize that there is a word for it. And so we do not have to be a blackened version of a European phenomena, the Jewish Holocaust, that we have it in and of ourselves, our own events. And that is the first major step towards liberation of a people, is to begin to describe, name,
Sorry, Dr. Washington, we appear to have lost your sound. Can you unmute yourself, please?
Okay, I apologize. The sound lost. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, yes, yeah.
We are sharing the screen, yes? Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can see the screen.
Yes, we can see it, yes.
Okay, thank you. So we want to begin the conversation to understand that when we talk about the Maafa, or the suffering of a people, we must understand that these are all dimensions of trauma, the disruption of a population. So the Maafa is defined as the great disaster, the calamity, the damage, the injustice, the misfortune, the catastrophe of a population. That is the idea of redefining for ourselves what that reality means is the process of the Maafa. Are we still sharing the screen? Let me make sure that we're sharing, because I know this technology can shift on us. Are we okay? Are we still sharing? Yes or no?
Yes, we are. We're still sharing.
Very good.
Please.
Okay. Some reason I have lost the capacity to be able to operate with the screen. Don't know what happened. Okay. So the Maafa, the great suffering of African people, we know that there were several dimensions of dynasties that had already been established in ancient Egypt and or Kemet. And so Dr. Anthony Browder is here to share with us that deep knowledge. For some reason, I have lost the capacity to share the screen, so I will come out of it and then go back into it again. So we must recognize then that there were great civilizations and dynasties that already existed on the continent of what now is called Africa. Some call it El Kebulan, some call it Tasseri, Tameri, Taiwani. This was already in operation. This was in full function. So as a result, we must recognize that the Arab invasion only comes at the latter part of a process, and that is to understand. I'm not quite understanding why I'm not sharing. This is amazing to me that we have this technology piece. So we will come out of it again. We'll stop the share, stop screen, and we'll go back to the regular vision. And so this process of understanding the Maafa, the disruption of a people coming from a position of wholeness, and that we're in the moment of Sankofa, that would be later, that there was great civilization, that was Apet Sut, some suggested was the holiest of holy places that existed, where there was high knowledge going on in this space. And this is important to recognize, because when the Arabs come in, they actually retain some of this information, this content. But it's in this place that you see people engaging in the process of writing and science and math. As a matter of fact, Herodotus, who is credited with being the father of Greek history, says when he got to the place, he saw the people as looked like they had been burnt or kissed by the sun. That is a reason for the word Ethiops. That there was also, as they moved in, Islamic invasion moved forward in the 14th and 18th century into Timbuktu. And in this space, there were libraries that were destroyed. 700 volumes of literature survived. And it's important to understand why that's important, because the reality is the reason that people go into a space to invade is because there's something of wealth in those spaces. We know that coming out of in ancient Kemet, there was the discussion of the liberating arts. There was grammar, rhetoric, logic. So we have a society, a culture giving to the world the capacity to write. We understand that there was Abu Simbel, there was the great temple there, Abu Simbel, and we understand how they constructed a particular building such that the sun would shine through the portal 2 times out of the entire year to the back of the portal. And this was done because they had a high knowledge of understanding the connection of the universe, of man to the universe. And so these things were the things that we have individuals coming in to get. Now, there were other invaders. There were the Hyksos invaders that came into the Kemet. There were also the Romans and the Greeks. They also came in pillaging the place. But towards the death of Muhammad in 632, we have 642 or so when the Arabs come in and they begin to move into the space. So I'm talking about 647 AD after or ACE, after Common Era. They move into North America, Abdullah side, and so 2,000 Arabs come in from Medina into Egypt, because they're in this space where there's this high knowledge, and so people want to get more of this knowledge. But in the process of coming in, they begin to take over, and so there was a major campaign that was considered to be the first invasion that lasted, some say, for about 15 months. But from 665 to 689, there was another second Arab invasion into northern Africa, and this invasion, with 40,000 Muslims or so, moved through, and they began to defeat the various nations on the continent for the purpose of greed, but also for the purpose of acquisition of information and content and knowledge. And so there is a reason that they're there, and the reason that they're there is because they want what is there, the wealth, the knowledge, the insight, the intellect that can be used to be profiteered for their benefit. And so this is critical to the conversation, to understand the various invasions. That the second invasion took place, and then there was the third invasion, with Hassan as the governor of Egypt or Kemet, and with the revenue of the entire kingdom, and consecrated for services with his 40,000 men in servitude to him. And they begin to move forward, and the Greeks at this time still maintain the sea coast, but the Arabs are taking over. And while they are taking over, let it be known that there is a great deal of pain and suffering going on, that there is pillaging, raping of individuals, there is the annihilation of generations of individuals, and there is the movement of a religious order. And so we have the Islamic conversation coming in that's creating a different way, a different worldview, a different way of seeing and connecting with the divine. And so all of these things are happening. So the question becomes, if the enslavement experience lasted for 10,000 years or several thousand years, what is the influence or impact of the enslaved at this time? What was the impact or influence of the enslaver at that time? What can be done about the effects of it? We know that this process has impacted the mental well-being, the psychological well-being, as well as the emotional well-being of a population. we understand then that the reality of war is that we have this disruption of the psychological well-being of a population that has been dispersed throughout the entire globe. We understand that there is not the possibility to have a post-traumatic moment, that it is an ongoing process, and thus we talk about the persistent enslavement, systemic trauma dynamics coming in from the various dimensions of incursions into the continent. And I want to say here for a moment that the greatest incursion is not the one that happens to land, but the one that happens to one's mind, that when one loses the capacity to conceptualize a reality. And that is why Stephen Biko says that the greatest weapon of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. And so we recognize that
Sorry, Dr. Washington, you've muted again for some reason.
technology is doing what it does best. It
Yes.
challenges us. And so we will continue to move through the challenges of this. It will not defeat us. It cannot defeat us because we come from a great and mighty people. We must recognize that the trauma that was created and continues to be a part of us is a part of a cultural trauma. And so we are still working to repair and heal from that. So we cannot have a PTSD, a post moment, because we are perpetually in that moment. Whether we look at what's happening in the United States with the George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, we look at what's happening right now in Ethiopia, we see that we perpetually there's this disruption of African greatness. And so the incursion has not stopped. And so again, the greatest incursion is not the one that occurs to land, but the one that occurs to one's mind. And so that is the thrust, the fight is to get the mind back, because once the mind is together, then the body falls into a distinct order and it begins to reestablish itself to be in liberation and also to be in sovereignty of the body. And so the mind is critical. So we recognize that the trauma and the memory of the trauma is there. We understand that there have been years again of the torture, of rape, of dehumanization, of degradation. But what is amazing is that we can come on this call, we can come in this space and have this conversation. We know that in the United States of America, that the psychological trauma of the enslavement experience, the idea of the sexual exploitation, the human trafficking has caused certain things where people have a false identity, believing themselves to be less than human, identifying with terminology of inhumanity. And that is not simply in America. That is one that is global, where we have a lot of our individuals seeking to leave the coast of West Africa on small boats and drowning in the water because it's seeking a better life. And that is a part of the psychological disruption that is taking place, that somehow the European is better. But how then do you leave what is great and what is wonderful for that which offers you a promise of something to be put into servitude? It is an Akan proverb that says that it is a fool to let someone sell him his own tomatoes. Also, the Akan say that we have had the libation that coming and going is how a bird builds its nest. It is okay to come and to go, mikraba, but the issue is that you must go and come. And sometimes we go and stay and don't recognize what we're leaving behind, right? We must recognize that the Maafa has disrupted not only the land, the people, but disrupted the mind and has benefited from the resources from the land. We must recognize that Europe and the United States, the West, benefits from the fruit of the land, while at the same time, those that have this value, have this particular resource, do not benefit from that. Again, in part because of the psychological disruption. We have leadership that begins to acquiesce and accommodate to the exploitation of the population, just so that they can get some mere pennies, small coins, trinkets, the shiny objects, and not understand what's being lost. The Maafa, the trauma, the horror, the effects are still with us today. As a clinician, I ask the question, what are those effects? what has happened to a population, not only in one space, but globally. What is going on, and how can we look at the repair? How can we heal protracted trauma? How can we heal it when there is denial that it even exists? How can we heal it when we don't recognize its impact? And who should do that healing work? And I submit to you that the healing work cannot occur from the oppressors, cannot occur from those who are perpetuating the process. It must come from within, those who have knowledge of what the original formation of the mind, the psyche, was before the disruption, those who have some insight into what it means to be who they are. And so we must recognize that the Maafa, the great suffering of a population, the Holocaust, continues because of a mental disruption. But there is something else that we must recognize. The Maafa, the forcing of abusive labor, the forcing of geographical dislocation, the forcing of constant duress, the forcing of the right of humanity has a toll, but the power is understanding that the people still exist, and that there is something to recognize where people can continue to exist and they can continue to move forward, that there is some resilience in those people, that's something greater than simply the oppressor's discourse. That we know about the Hyksos again invasion, we know about the Greeks and the Romans and the Arab invasion. These are all forms of persistent enslavement, systemic trauma, what I call pest. So we can say that the Hyksos, the Kemet, the Greeks, the Romans, and the Arabs were a source of traumatizing experiences for a strong people. However, the potential to continue to exist, the potential to continue to thrive, is that seed of a seed of a seed of a seed of the seed that Dr. Fukuyama reminds us that we are connected to something bigger than the events of the trauma. And so that we come in with this great, powerful reality that Dr. John Henry Clark talks about, a great and mighty walk that we are. We recognize that this is a great and mighty population that we're talking about in this month that has been deemed as African History Month. We recognize the power of the human potential. All humans are born with the power to create a reality, even if under some horrific conditions, they still are able to continue to be able to connect to the something greater than themselves, that everyone begins as something smaller than a period at the end of a sentence, and yet they grow and they expand, that everyone starts from the brain stem and come out. Everyone starts from that reality of something greater, and then they become even more so. And so we recognize that we have to recapture the power of the mind that tells us that we are a great and mighty people. Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune says that we are heirs and custodian of a great people. We must recognize this greatness, but somehow we surrender it. And we become more complicit with the oppressor, not recognizing that they see our greatness more so than we. And so we begin to focus so much on them that we miss out on the power of who we are, that all things come from the mind first, and everything that must be transformed starts from a thought. And so we have to then think ourselves of being a different people, that when we look at the African history, we must reflect on our greatness. We must reflect on the fact that without the idea of people understanding how to chart the moon and the stars, to understand that without their creation, we would not understand our relationship to it. The reason that we have seasons that shift and change, with understanding this so-called Easter and Passover and Ramadan that occurs in this time, is not based on the Arabs or the Europeans or the Greeks. It is based on Africans understanding that there are cycles and seasons in the universe, and that the sun traverses in a certain space, or the earth moves around the sun in a certain way, and the moon moves around that. And so these things give us an indication of when things should happen and how things should flow, and that we are tied to the universe, that we are a microcosm of the macrocosm. That is a powerful notation, because it took them thousands of years to be able to come up with this information, and that the Dogon talk about the Sirius B star. So there is generational knowledge that exists in a population, even in the midst of the idea of the invasions of other people. And so that is what happened when you recognize your greatness. You can move away from looking at the madness and seeing the power that is within. We must reconnect with our purpose, understand that there's a reason that we exist. There's a reason for the dispersal of African people. There's a reason that we continue to thrive in the midst of all of the incursions, not only the physical ones, but also the psychological ones. And then we must resurrect our sacred essence. Beyond the trauma, beyond the horror, is the sacred essence that we must be able to resurrect and to elevate. And so, and we in this season of resurrection, the idea of the season of light overcoming darkness, the season coming from the equinox on the northern hemisphere. And so we recognize that there is this illumination occurring. And so this African History Month, this African History moment, is about recognizing how we can seize the moment to elevate ourselves, to move beyond the darkness of not knowing who we are, to move into the illumination, the light of our true power, our true essence, and our true purpose. And we recognize that, then we do not pause and stare at and look at the traumatic experiences. We give acknowledgement to them that they did occur, but they only occurred because the people were great and mighty. You don't go someplace where there's nothing there. You go where there's great wealth. You go where there's great purpose, there's great power. And so in this process, we recognize that the reason we have encountered the incursions is because of our greatness. The reason that we continue to exist is because of our greatness. The reason that we will continue to thrive beyond all incursions is because we have been imbued with power, with purpose, and with passion. So with that, I will conclude this segment of the presentation to suggest to us to acknowledge and recognize that we are indeed a great and mighty people. That yes, people came to disrupt us, but we have the capacity at this moment to reclaim our minds. And when we get our minds back, then our behinds go in a different direction. And so we're in this season of illumination, recapturing the power of who we are beyond the Maafa, beyond the suffering. We're moving into this illumination into great African humanity. Thank you.
Thank you for your wonderful, powerful words, Dr. Washington. It has just been so amazing listening to you. We have heard that healing cannot come from the oppressors, it must come from within. We need to understand that we are greater than the trauma we experience and recapture our greatness and not surrender it. And African history is about reflecting on our greatness. And another thing that you said is that we have to remember that it happened to us because we're somebody. These things wouldn't have happened to us if we were nobody. And that's what we need to keep in mind. It's because we are great. This is why we have oppressors. This is why we are under attack, because they need what we have. And so this is what it's about. So today is about honoring our ancestors on the shoulders on whom we stand. We stand on their shoulders, their greatness. That's who we are. And so I thank you again for your powerful words and your powerful reminder of these things that we need to keep in mind. We need to keep these things in mind. It's such a great encouragement. Okay, so our next item on the program is actually Adam Hudson. Now, Adam Hudson has prepared a video for us, but a little bit about who Adam is. Adam Hudson is a journalist, commentator, musician, Pan-Africanist, and co-host of the Pan-African Leftist podcast, Real Sankara Hours. He holds a BA in International Relations from Stanford University, class of 2010, and MFA in Nonfiction Writing from University of San Francisco. And he was born in Oakland, California, and raised in Pittsburgh, California, a multi-ethnic working class suburb in the East Bay area, a journalist. Adam typically covers war and peace issues. He is a musician. He's a dedicated musician. And for 6 years, he played drums in the now disbanded alternative rock band Sonata. As a solo artist, he plays the djembe and fuses traditional African rhythms in a modern African American context as a way to show pride in his diasporic African heritage. He is also a member of the US-based representative of Global Pan-Africanism Network. Now, if you bear with me, I'm going to try and share his video that he has sent to us for this event.
Adam Hudson with Global Pan-Africanism Network. I'm the United States representative for GPAN. I'm based here in the San Francisco Bay Area in California on the west coast of the United States. Um, I'm an African American. Well, I play djembe, and I'm also a journalist, podcaster, educator, musician, um, and been involved in activism for pretty much my entire adult life. So I'm going to be talking about the transatlantic slave trade and the impact it's had on the United States, African Americans. Um, and yeah, so what's going to be coming up is just a, presentation. So anyway, enjoy.
The transatlantic slave trade, there's been slavery throughout human history, but the transatlantic slave trade, in terms of scale and brutality, um, is something that's just really unique. And I like to refer to the transatlantic slave trade as the Maafa, the African Holocaust. And in terms of when the transatlantic slave trade started, I have this map of the slave trade right here, but I want to kind of backtrack in terms of what led up to it. Now, when we're talking about the slave trade, we're really talking about chattel slavery, in which slaves are commodities to be bought and sold, rather than say a domestic servant or an indentured servant you keep in the home. So this is a massive trade in human beings, and a total dehumanization of African people over a period of 400 years. So, but the thing is, like, the transatlantic slave trade, there were things that led up to it, and then it started. So, really, the Portuguese um, were the ones who really kickstarted the transatlantic slave trade. Um, they were really the first ones to begin the European slave trading in Africa, and the start of the sugar slave complex started in the Portuguese island of Madeira, which is like in the Atlantic coast off the coast of Portugal, and this is for the first time where they put enslaved Africans to work on sugar plantations, and this was in 1452. Um, and then in 1454, Pope Nicholas the Fifth grants a papal bull, which gives like Portugal a perpetual monopoly on trade with Africa. But then the Spain was beginning to uh, get slaves from Africa as well. Um, then Cape Verde Island. Um, yeah, Cape Verde Island was founded as like a really important way station in the slave trade. So Cape Verde Islands are off the coast of modern day Senegal and Gambia. So in 1462, the Portuguese established their colony in the Cape Verde Islands, and that was a way station for the slave trade, and that's where uh, they brought enslaved Africans as well. Um, then 1492 here in the United States. We have the saying that in 1492 Columbus sailed the ocean blue. So Christopher Columbus, an Italian merchant, was sent by Queen Isabella of Spain to discover the New World, and which basically led to the conquest of the Americas. But that's a whole other thing to talk about. Um, but so there was already the Portuguese slave trade of Africans, and then Spain, the Spanish Empire kicked in. So really, it was Spain and Portugal who really started it, and then England and France caught on later. So a really important date is August 1518, and that's when King Charles I of Spain authorized Spain to ship enslaved people directly from Africa to the Americas, and that's when the slave trade rose dramatically. So when we look at the map of the transatlantic slave trade, you can just see the scale, like 10.7 million enslaved Africans and possibly even more were kidnapped and trafficked from Western and Central Africa to the Americas. Especially Brazil, most enslaved Africans were taken to Brazil, as you can see on this map, and then other parts of South America, like the Dutch and British Guianas, Venezuela, Colombia, um, uh, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, Haiti, Cuba, and then the American Southeast. But also, like, there were enslaved Africans who were taken to the United States, including the uh, state New York. This is showing how the massive scale of slave trade in the Americas. When it comes to where the Africans were taken from, uh, it gets really complicated because when you start doing DNA tests for African Americans, our lineage is all over the map. So we can't um, particularly trace our lineage to one specific ethnic group in Africa. Like, in fact, African Americans and all descendants of the transatlantic slave trade are basically an amalgamation of different African ethnic groups. I believe the number is around 45 different African ethnic groups. So, as you can see on this map, in terms of where the enslaved Africans were kidnapped from, you can see like the exact regions. So, Senegambia, Sierra Leone, the Windward Coast, the Gold Coast, Ghana, Bight of Benin, Bight of Biafra. So that's like Benin, and then we're getting into Biafra, Nigeria, Cameroon, and then Western and Central Africa, particularly the Congo and present day Angola. So that's pretty much who we are as a people. We're a fusion of different African ethnic groups from Western and Central Africa. This map gets even more specific because you can see a map of Western and Central Africa, and then the American South, the southwestern states, and as you can see, like where the ships picked our ancestors from and where they dropped us off. So even again, without doing DNA analysis individually, you can see like where in Africa that the enslaved Africans were taken from, and where, particularly in the United States, that they were dropped off. You can see Georgia, South Carolina, Virginia, etc., etc. So, and yeah, as you can tell, like our lineage is, we have a lot of ancestors from Congo, Angola, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Senegambia, Ghana, um, and that's who we are as a people. So here are the number of countries throughout Western Europe that were involved in the transatlantic slave trade. I was able to find some stats, and I thought these were pretty good. Basically, between 1514 and 1866, 7 countries in Western Europe were involved in the slave trade, and these are the numbers of the enslaved Africans that these respective countries captured. So you can see with Portugal, it's over 3.8 million, almost 4 million. With the UK, it's almost 3.1 million. France, 1.3 million. Netherlands and Spain, over half a million. The United States, nearly 400,000. And Denmark, just a little over 100,000. And this, once you add all that up, that's well over 10 million, 10.7 million enslaved Africans who were kidnapped, snatched by these European colonial powers and trafficked to their respective plantations and colonies in the Americas, anywhere from Brazil to Cuba to Jamaica to the United States, the American South, um, and elsewhere throughout the Caribbean, Central America, and South America. So, yeah, you can see these numbers right here, the countries that were the most active in the transatlantic slave trade. And, yeah, pretty much all of Western Europe was involved in the slave trade. The reason why the transatlantic slave trade lasted for so long, and why so many countries in Western Europe were involved, and why it was so brutal, is because the transatlantic slave trade built the startup capital for global capitalism. Um, European slave masters, colonizers, they profited immensely from the forced labor of enslaved Africans. And enslaved Africans were valuable in a number of ways. They cultivated the raw materials and the cash crops that were turned into products that were sold on a global market for a product. So, cotton, sugar, tobacco, especially in the Caribbean, sugar plantations were very prominent because that's where a lot of the sugar was located, and in the United States it was cotton. So the forced labor of enslaved Africans was used to cultivate these cash crops uh, for products that would be sold for a profit. And obviously, because they were slaves, they didn't receive a cent for their labor. But enslaved Africans were also valuable because they were considered property rather than humans, and property is valuable. So when you're turning humans into property, you make humans in a valuable commodity, and that's where banking and finance were involved. In the United States, Wall Street, where the famous Wall Street, the wall that was built to keep Native Americans away from the area was built by enslaved Africans, and Wall Street got to start as a slave market, a market to trade in enslaved Africans, who again were reduced to property rather than treated as human beings. But then also, banks were heavily invested because, again, this is a global slave trade. So banks and investors were deeply invested in the trade and sale of human beings. So banks like J.P. Morgan Chase, their predecessor banks, they accepted enslaved Africans as collateral for loans. Insurance companies like New York Life and Aetna, they provided insurance to slave masters who lost their property. Like, let's say if a enslaved African got injured or if they died, the insurance company would provide insurance on the lost property. Um, and again, because slaves were considered property, they were assets, and so those as assets they were used by banks as collateral for mortgages on land. And when assessing a person's wealth, banks would also count the number of slaves a person had to determine that person's wealth. So the entire system of global capitalism was built by slavery. So the way I see it is, as an African American, I see my ancestors like they were literally used as the startup capital for capitalism, and the entire wealth of the American Empire, the British Empire, French Empire, Spanish Empire, Portuguese Empire was fueled by the transatlantic slave trade. And the global capitalist system we have today exists because of the transatlantic slave trade. When we're talking about slavery, slavery in the United States and policing in the United States are inextricably linked. Um, Modern American policing was birthed by slavery, and particularly the slave patrol system in the American South. So, slave patrols, the first slave patrol was created in the Carolina counties in 1704, and their main job was to chase down, catch, and return runaway slaves to their owners, provide a form of organized terror to prevent slave revolts, and maintain a form of discipline for slaves. So there were very strict laws that slaves had to abide by, and those laws and those practices were um, enforced through terrorism and violence, and slave patrols were a main institution to enforce that. So, and after slavery ended, the slave patrol system evolved. It didn't go away, but it evolved into policing in the American South to enforce legalized racial apartheid, otherwise known as Jim Crow. And then their practices pretty lay the foundation for policing throughout the United States. So, as we look in images of black people being killed by police in the United States, that slavery is the genesis of that. The reason why American police kill African Americans, black people so often is because they evolved out of slavery. Enslaved Africans were whipped, tortured, beaten, subjected to all kinds of cruelty, and even during the middle passage from Africa to the Americas, many Africans died, or and some even jumped over the ship because they would rather face death than enslavement. But the cruelty, I think, is best heard by the victims themselves. So here's actually a clip of a former slave who spoke about like the kind of violence she endured during slavery. Thankfully, these these audio recordings were recorded in the United States in the 1930s. So there are interviews of former slaves who talked about the what life during slavery was like, and even some of the violence that they endured.
Is 91-year-old Texan Laura Smalley talking in the 1940s about the outcome of a tussle between two women, one black, one white, one slave, one mistress. The mistress tried to slap the slave, but the black woman pushed her into a chair. Laura Smalley was a girl at the time, but she remembers vividly what happened to the black woman when the master came home.
Well, they taken that old woman, poor old woman, carried in the peach orchard and whipped her. And, just tied her hand this way, around the peach orchard tree. I remember that just as well, looked like to me, I can. And round the tree and whipped her. And, well, she couldn't do nothing but just kick her feet, just kick her feet. But it just had her clothes off down to her waist, Just didn't have her plumb naked, but they had her clothes down to her waist. And every now and then they'd whip her, and then snuff the pipe out on her, snuff the pipe out on her. The embers in the pipe. I don't know where you ever see the pipe smoking.
Blow them out on her? Mm-hmm. Good Lord, have mercy.
The plantation on which Smalley was a slave sounds brutal. She recalls scrambling with other children for food from a huge wooden tray, like a hog trough.
All of them, would get around that tray with spoons and eat, such like mush or soup or something like that. And all them children get around there and just eat.
Despite the violence of slavery and how enslaved Africans were tortured, beaten, killed, and their indigenous cultures were ripped from them violently, there's they were still incredibly resilient. They fought back. They fought back on the slave ships. They fought back on the plantations, and in many ways they fought back by maintaining and preserving the culture that they were able to preserve. So on the slave ships on plantations, because so many of these different Africans came from different ethnic groups, they were able to fuse and amalgamate their different musical traditions, and that created that was basically the foundation for all the music that we listen to today, all the black music that we listen to. So jazz, blues, samba, Afro-Cuban, a lot of Latin music with African roots. That can all be traced to the musical traditions of enslaved Africans that they were able to preserve on the slave ships and on the plantations. And again, despite the violence of slavery, they were able to resist by preserving their culture and also creating a new culture, a new diasporic African culture that persists to this day.
So when I think about resilience and the slave trade, and I think about my own heritage, being African American, and being able to trace my lineage to enslaved Africans on both sides of my family to different parts of the plantations within the American South. And I know one part of my mom's family were runaways who managed to run away from slavery, and they've been in Philadelphia since the 1850s. And I know some of my ancestors, we were able actually to trace our lineage back to where we came from, at least one part of my family. So I know I have ancestors who come from Sierra Leone, particularly the Temne people. So that basically means, like, some of my ancestors were Temne people who were kidnapped from Sierra Leone and trafficked here to the United States, specifically Virginia. In Virginia, for those of you who are unaware, is the first permanent colonial settlement in British North America, which would become the United States of America. It was established in 1619, so that's over 400 years ago. And the reason why I play djembe, and for me why it's really significant, is I read a story about this djembe player from Sierra Leone, and he grew up in a village, and he told a story that really struck me. And he said that during the slave trade in Sierra Leone, like there was a village where people would play djembe to warn Africans to basically escape from the slave trade. So as basically Africans were being kidnapped and snatched left and right in the interior, there was a village where people knew that they were slave raiders, so they played the djembe, and based on the rhythms, people knew that the village was a safe place to hide from slave catchers in the interior. So as someone who can trace part of my lineage back to Sierra Leone, like, that just really struck me. Obviously my ancestors were unfortunate, they were kidnapped, but I keep thinking about the principle of Sankofa to go back and fetch. So for me, playing djembe is like I'm retrieving a drum that belongs to my ancestors and just bringing it back here. So what follows actually is going to be a djembe performance, mostly to celebrate the resilience of our ancestors, because despite all the violence that we suffered and continue to suffer, we're still a resilient people, and I think our culture reflects that. So thank you.
That was just wonderful. Thank you so much. Brother Adam, for the education that you've given to us and the wonderful history, well, the history that you shared, but the wonderful playing and the knowledge that you've given to us. It's just been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for that wonderful video. The videos really are a great way to do StreamYard. That's clear. That's really clear. We're now going to move into our next segment of the program, which is the Luton Sankofa UK commemoration. And I'm going to invite our host for that segment, Debbie, to come on stream. Welcome, Debbie.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Before we go any further, I have to say, when I first started this conference, I was a little bit nervous and I even forgot to introduce myself. So in case you didn't know, I am Diana Marquis-Solomon and I am a member of GPAN, and so is my sister, Leah Debbie Marcus. She's my natural sister as well as my sister. She's my natural sister. And we're really honored today to be part of this program. And we're also part of and members of the Luton Sankofa UK. And without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to my sister and she's going to take us forward. So over to you.
Thank you, Di. Thank you. So first of all, let me thank everybody who has joined us via the African History Month YouTube channel, Tunacheki TV YouTube channel, Luton Sankofa UK page, and the United States of Africa page via Facebook. We're very honoured and excited to be here. So thank you again, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the Luton Sankofa 5th Civic Commemoration of our ancestors who are the victims of the Transatlantic enslavement. I won't go into much more detail here as it's obviously part of the programme. Today we have the honour of sharing this commemorative event as part of African History Month's 6th conference for 2021, entitled The African Holocaust of Maafa, a remembrance of the victims of the Transatlantic, Indian Ocean and Trans-Saharan slave trade. African History Month is an annual celebration of the achievements of Black people of African descent and the recognition of the enormous contributions Africa has made to the world's civilization. So we're absolutely grateful and it's a pleasure to be here. And I want to also take this time to say a big thank you to our sponsor, to the Cheki TV, Council of Ethiopian Diaspora Action, and the United States of Africa for making all of this possible today. Before we go any further with the event, I just want to say a little bit about Martin Hansen, who opened up today with the Libation. Martin, he's the director of Association Theatre, which is an American arts and education company, where he runs workshops in African music, drumming, dance, storytelling, and visual arts for all schools of all ages, established in 1997. And his company has a track record of working with young people and helping them unearth their hidden creative
breaking
skills.
up.
Their education supports the teaching.
Get back onto stream.
Supports the teaching of.
You're breaking up,
Hear me?
Debbie.
Can you hear me?
You're
There?
kind of breaking
Am
up.
I breaking up? I'm not quite sure.
A bit.
I think it might just be the network. It might just be the network here.
Try and speak a bit slow. If you speak a bit slower, we may be able to capture what you're saying.
Okay. All right.
And get it close.
So he was established in.
Excellent.
Okay.
That's better.
Right. Okay. So established in 1997, the company has a track record in working with young people and helping them unearth their hidden creative skills. The educational program supports the teaching and learning of multicultural activities and enable schools to use the company as its resource as they cut across all subjects under the curriculum. At this time, I'd like to invite Martin Hansen back to waken us up some more with a bit more drum. I hope you all enjoy.
Thank you.
Wonderful. That was wonderful. I could listen to that all day. You
Thank
certainly
you
had
very
us moving in the studio. Thank you so much, Martin.
much. Thank you.
Okay. Debbie?
Thank you, Martin. That was wonderful. I was obviously moving a lot before you actually came on, which is probably why my mic wasn't working very well. Certainly enjoyed hearing your talking drums. Brilliant. At this stage now, I'd like to welcome Councillor Jackie Bennett, who's the chair of the Luton Sankofa, to tell us a little bit about us and what we do. Thank you.
Afternoon. I cannot say how thankful I am to be here today, and actually that this moment has arrived. It's been a prayer of mine for many years that we should commemorate and honour our ancestors, as many races commemorate and honour their fallen. We have taken many years to do it, and sometimes in the discussions we have left it to others and say, why don't they? And I'm glad we've owned our history and we are crossing internationally and holding hands to commemorate our fallen. So can I have my presentation up, please? While I'm speaking, I just want to say I hope everybody is safe and well out there. We are going through challenging times, but we are seizing the opportunity that has been presented to us, because if we hadn't been going through the pandemic, the previous speakers that we've had today, this afternoon, Dr. Kevin Washington and Adam Hudson, we in Luton would not have heard. So it's really, really an immense moment, very significant. A colleague of mine would say tectonic plates are shifting, for us to be doing this today. So I am Jacqueline Berner. I am the chair of Luton Sankofa in Luton, and we debated the name, and my colleague Diane and Debbie, to come up with the word Sankofa, looking back in order to go forward. And we've been doing that since 2016. Next slide, please. Next, if people can hear me. Right. The committee members are made up of myself, and Diana Marquis-Solomon is the vice chair. Lorna Markland is our director of operation. Debbie Marquis is the chief researcher. Soraya Bowen is an additional researcher. Maureen Samuel is our marketing manager, and Norma Joseph, the committee members. We have been on an immense journey along the way, and we really do miss each other, I have to say right now. It was really interesting planning this event, because we would have spent many a night quite late over at Diane's house or at a coffee place or a venue planning today. So we are adapting, and as Dr. Kevin Washington said about our greatness, we've realised our greatness as we have self-funded this event until all the way since after the first year, because that was a bit challenging, and I'm sure you can understand. And I resonate with Dr. Kevin Washington saying, when you go for help from your oppressor, so we've done it ourselves. And next slide, please. Next. Right. The journey of Luton Sankofa UK really started back in 2007, as the UN date did recognise the bicentennial commemoration of the abolition of the slave trade. So us in London, in Luton, and up and down the UK seized the opportunity to actually do events in London, in Birmingham, in Manchester. There's an organisation which is called the Heritage Fund that the government, through lottery funding, provided funding for community organisations up and down the country in 2007 to do events. We in Luton we set up an umbrella group to do some research. So we had people working to see the connections to slavery that was in Luton, Bedfordshire. We're a small town of about 215,000 population based on the 2011 census. And people were saying, oh, Luton ain't got nothing to do with slavery. And people within the team found out that Luton has. And actually, a street in Luton we have recently discovered since the Black Lives Matter movement, Hibbert Street, is named after a slave owner who was compensated at the end of slavery. And one of the electoral wards, Crawley, is named after somebody that profited from slavery and gave a lot of money to the Church of England. So there's been a journey going on since that year. In 2008, the General Secretary of the UN set the date of the 25th of March for an annual commemoration. There's also a date in August that is set for commemoration and to remember the fallen. However, we in Luton felt it was better to do March than August because of school holidays. In the UK, school holiday starts at the end of July up until September, and we're thinking people would be away with their families. So we decided March during the academic year would be an ideal opportunity to bring the community together, to re-educate and to have dialogue. And one of the pivotal thing that happened was in 2015, after the local election, I became a cabinet member on Luton Borough Council, and I was the first person of African heritage to be on the cabinet of executive. And for me, that was an opportune time to as well to fight for everybody in my town, which I love, even though I'm not a Lutonian. I was actually born in London, but I spend more of my life here than London right now. It was an opportune time to make sure that the Black voice, the African voice, is heard at the table as we built this country. Can we move forward to the next slide, please? Next. So in December 2015, after going on to the exec or the cabinet, I had a conversation with Luton Borough Council about they commemorating, using the date, the UN date, to commemorate the transatlantic slave trade. In the discussion, they said it would be better, or they felt it would be better if the community led it than the council led it, because of austerities and reducing funds and things like that. So I went, okay, I'm not going to have no argument. Let me put it out to the community. And I did a call out, and I got a response. I was a bit nervous, I must say, because you never know. Because of the trauma, as our colleague Dr. Kevin Washington touched on earlier, about the psychology of our mind. So I wasn't sure what I was going to get, but I felt led. And there's a saying of, if you don't ask, you don't get. Yes, and seeking you shall find. So I sought out my community in Luton, of which there's about 10% of the population in Luton based on the last census. And a few people turned up in January after Christmas, a few of us, freezing for us here in the UK. We met together at a Caribbean restaurant bar in the town centre. It was freezing, but we stayed and we started to get to know each other. And yeah, a small handful. It doesn't take a lot of people to make a change. You don't need the mass, but you need people that are prepared to work together, gel together to make something happen with a shared vision. And in January 2016, Luton Sankofa was formed. Next. And we've been on an interesting journey along the way. So the first thing we came up with in 2016 was putting our history in its rightful perspective. We decided a lot of us were leaving our education to the state in Britain or in America to tell our story. They're not going to tell our story. Yeah, let's just come to terms with it. We need to tell it. And that's what in Britain, that's what we've been doing a long time with the supplementary schools, that's Saturday schools. But it was really important now to take it to another level, because everybody else in Britain, all the other immigrants tell their history and their story. We wanted to tell our story. So can you go back? I haven't finished yet, please. Thank you. So we done that in 2016. In 2017, we wanted to talk about the African heroes that brought about the abolition of slavery. Because anybody would think in Britain it was William Wilberforce, MP, who was the MP for Hull, that brought it back, and all the whites decided that it suddenly got a conscience. Not that our ancestors were rebelling and fighting and uprising in the Caribbean. That was an excellent work, and at the time, we did a lot of research, Debbie and Diana Marquis, and we touched on about the colonization of Africa. It was important to do that, to carry on the journey. In 2018, we done celebrating our past and present educators. We've been, and from the beginning of the journey, the young people have been part of what we've been doing, because we need to pass on a stronger mantle than what was passed to us to change their mind. Our young people need to know more about their history than the people that are teaching it in the school, yeah? Because it's down to us to hold up and stand straight. And then like 2019, we was about personalizing it, making them humanized. Humanizing was really important to us. And one of our committee members felt that was really, really important. So we did that, and since 2019, there was a series and a documentary done by Samuel L. Jackson, Slaves. Well, you know what? We in Luton were doing some work, forefront, blazing ahead on about personalizing our ancestors. And at that event in 2019, we showed the video of Ghana calling us back, the year of the return. And I'll never forget how excited we were about it. I always remember hairs on my arms stood up, that we left the slave and that we're coming back to the motherland as heroes. It was very spiritual and dancing. And we even did some dancing with Martin's group with the drumming that day. And we brought the young people in, and we talked about chasing our ancestral roots by a writer, Paul Crooks, in the UK. And that was really, really informative. I'm coming to the end right now, and I'm really excited. Oh, I'm so happy. Next slide, please. The purpose or the vision, the raison d'etre, was the mission that we set up in Luton Sankofa, was to be a non-profit African Caribbean group formed to organize the annual commemoration of the victims of the Transatlantic slave trade, which coincides with the UN Day of the 25th of March. It was and is our aim that the Black community or African heritage diaspora comes together to commemorate the billion of ancestors who suffered during the African Holocaust, which also give the rise to the opportunity to re-educate the community, change our mindset we're talking about of our histories that pre and post date African enslavement, thereby putting it in its correct historical context. It is also our desire to help bridge the gap between Africa and the Caribbean history. We are rejoining the vine. I thank you. And I finish now. Happy days. Over to you, Debbie.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jackie. That was wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. As our commemoration is a civic one, the Mayoress of Luton, Councillor Maria Lovell, has been invited to open today's commemoration officially. Councillor Maria Lovell is the first Luton Mayor to be invested online. She was the standing deputy at the time and stepped up to the role following the resignation of the previous mayor. Councillor Lovell founded the Ghana Society in 2006 to promote and showcase Ghana's cultural heritage. The society became the first group to demonstrate traditional African costumes in Luton International Carnival. She has supported various charities such as Mercy Ships, breast cancer, prostate cancer, and Royal Children's Cancer to raise funds for their causes. At this stage, I'd like to please welcome Councillor Maria Lovell.
Hello. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, Maria, we can hear you. We can hear
I can hear you, Marie. I can hear you loud and clear, darling.
Oh, okay. I can now. I couldn't before. Oh, good. Good evening, all. For those who don't know me, I'm Councillor Maria Lavelle, Mayor of Luton. I greet you all and thank you for the invitation. Medasipi, meaning thank you very much. Being of African descent and the first royal development queen of the renowned Kente cloth, I thought I'd dress in my traditional attire for this event this evening. And the first to ascend the role as mayor, I am truly honored to open this year's commemoration of the victims of the Transatlantic African Enslavement Civic Service today, 25th of March, which has been set aside by the United Nations to remember our ancestors. I thank my sisters and brothers and fellow Lutonians who answered the call 6 years ago to come together, forming the Luton Sankofa UK. In honor of all who suffered and died during the transatlantic African enslavement. God bless your efforts and your ancestors' blessings, because that has brought us here today. A year ago, I was delighted and excitedly looking forward to speaking at the Sankofa event, only to be awoken by the COVID-19 pandemic crisis. And what a year it has been. I reread my notes from then, and it hits me what a different world we find ourselves in now. With the challenges we have all faced over the last year, it's fitting that we are now linking arms internationally to commemorate and honor our ancestors. Moreover, to bring comfort and healing to all as we come together meaningfully to bridge historical gaps. I would like to express my deepest gratitude to the African History Month founder, Daniel Mwambonu, for extending this opportunity, enabling the delivery of the Sankofa commemoration event within the United States on a global platform. Sankofa is going back to our roots, to take, to reclaim, to learn, be educated from the deepest roots of our history, to go back and take, to move forward positively, as Councillor Jackie said. With this in mind, today we remember our ancestors, our great-great-grandparents, but all one race from the African continent where Sankofa's roots began. We all have deep scars from the history of the transatlantic slave trade, whose effect has been with the world ever since and been the subject of intense universal debates, especially in recent times, emerging from the Black Lives Movement. We need to learn more as a basis to understand ourselves, both in the motherland and in the diaspora, and work at how to turn that travesty into something more positive for our race. Let's take this opportunity and proudly rewrite and correct our African history in order to elevate our race into a sustainable position on the continent and reverberate throughout the diaspora. We all need to heal collectively. The whole continent of Africa and the Caribbean and the Americas needs to heal. We need to build up trust and love amongst us to neutralize this divide amongst us, because Mother Africa lost her children too. Great sons and daughters, princes and queens. Let's embrace the healing process and begin a triumphant journey back to our roots, to the ancestral heritage waiting to receive us. And Mother Africa will rise to meet us and say, welcome back. In the call to return and beyond the return, let's return through the door of no return, triumphantly, as Barack Obama symbolically demonstrated when he visited Ghana. As victorious people of great minds, strong and bold, as the ancestors we celebrate today, who cried for freedom, who fought for freedom and died for freedom and dreamed to one day return home to their rich continent. So we celebrate them, to honor them, but to also take back, which is the Sankofa. We also take back their wisdom, courage, and strength to their toils of blood, to the cry for freedom, for one day to be carried back to Africa. So let's honor them today, tomorrow, and the next, to celebrate them as they continue to watch over us, to empower us to be bold and courageous, to take that bold step of reuniting with the motherland of Africa as her great sons and daughters of heroes, returning with great treasures of intellect to help repair her wounds and protect her cultural heritage and richness. Let's all Sankofa start that journey. We each have our own stories to tell. So yes, it's not going to be easy, but we have got to take those small, bold steps to make a mental start of that journey as we celebrate this evening. To quote the great hero and son of Africa, Madiba Nelson Mandela, it always seems impossible until it's done. Once again, on behalf of the Luton Council and Luton Town, I thank Luton Sankofa UK for this event and wish you a lovely evening. Medasi, Nyami Shawan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lovell. That was absolutely beautiful and moving. Absolute honour to have you here. Thank you so much. Okay. Normally, as part of our civic commemorations, we would invite young people from the community to light candles to read out a small narrative highlighting the lives of our chosen heroes and heroines. The thing we have chosen to highlight today,
sorry, Debbie.
although enslaved.
Sorry. Debbie, your mic keeps breaking up. It's really breaking up. Try and speak a bit slower and try not to move. I think maybe the movement is affecting it. Let's see how that works. Sorry.
Okay, that's okay. So I'll start again. So normally, as part of our civic commemorations, we would invite young people from the community to light candles and read out a small narrative highlighting the lives of our chosen heroes and heroines. The three we have chosen to highlight today, although enslaved, were in a position to narrate their own journey. We have Pierre Toussaint, read by Lorna Marklin, the director of Luton Sankofa; Ashton Warner, read by Sarah Jane Solomon, student; and Mary Prince, read by Ria Douglas, an educator. Thank you.
Good evening. Pierre Toussaint. Pierre Toussaint was born in 1766 on the island of Saint Domingo, now Haiti. Pierre was the son of Ursule and the great-grandchild of Tonette, an African who was sold into slavery and brought to Saint Domingo at the Artibonite plantation and owned by the Berard family. Pierre laboured in the cane fields, but was also trained as a domestic and was taught to read and write by the Berard family's tutors. There were many rebellions and uprisings in Haiti, which would lead to Haitian slaves and free people of colour rising in rebellion. In 1787, after tensions continued to rise, Berard and his second wife left the island for New York City, taking 5 of their slaves with them, including Pierre, who was freed from slavery upon the death of his mistress, and he then purchased the freedom of other enslaved Africans, including his sister and his future wife. I light a candle for Pierre Toussaint.
Ashton Warner. The experiences of Ashton Warner were published in March 1831 in London with the help of Anti-Slavery Society in a book entitled Negro Slavery Described by Negro. We do not know when he was born, however, he is known as Ashton Warner of St. Vincent. He was purchased and cared for by an aunt while a baby, and his childhood was spent in freedom. When he was about 10 years old, however, an unscrupulous slave owner kidnapped and impressed him into slavery on a plantation estate in Cane Grove. He was a very defiant child and often rebelled and attempted to escape because he knew that he was already free. Over the course of several years, Warner and his aunt pursued his case in the St. Vincent's and other West Indian courts, endeavouring to have Warner's manumission papers and therefore his freedom. Finally, unable to continue the acceptance of his illegal enslavement, Warner travelled to London in order to try to prove his freedom in a metropolitan court of law. While in London waiting for the outcome of his suit, Warner sadly passed away. I light a candle for Ashton Warner.
Over to you, Ria. Hello, Ria? Can you hear me? Hello? Hello? Hello, Ria? Can you hear me? Ria? Ria? Hello?
In
Can you hear
Bermuda
me? Ria? Ria?
and colonies.
Hello, Ria?
Mary was first separated at the age of 7. Although she describes her childhood as a happy one,
Ria?
she narrates that she was too young to understand the harsh realities of slavery she would come to know in her older years. Her narrative was one of the first to describe the ugly truths about slavery in the Caribbean. She was sold to a number of brutal owners, eventually